If you want to know what's going on with the sea, if you want to know what's going on with the climate, if you want to know what's going on in the world, ask a fisherman.
Honestly, this is a joy. Mark, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I'm speaking with Mark Jenkin, the director and screenwriter of Rose of Nevada, which is just a wonderful film. I'm sure you've heard that a lot. And you're
Yeah,
going to hear
I
it
don't
more.
get tired of it though.
Well, you can hear it again. It really is. There's something wonderful about this film. It's the story of two semi time traveling fishermen, if you will. It really is something unique. Where did the film come from?
It came out of necessity. It's the first time I've had to write a film. Somebody's told me I've had to write a film and I've had to do it, and it wasn't like a commission, but we were just about to get ready to shoot my previous film, Ennis Main, and it was the spring of 2020, and then COVID came around and we went into lockdown, and that film was put on pause for a year. So during the lockdown, I decided that I needed to write something. It seemed like the perfect opportunity, but the thing was, I didn't really have anything ready to go to write. I hadn't conceptualized anything because I was getting ready to film Ennis Main. And Mary, my partner, who is in Rose of Nevada and who's the lead in Ennis Main, my previous film, and in Bait, my first film, she said to me, have you got no ideas? And I said, well, I got this one idea about one scene, an opening to a film, which is this fishing boat coming back and um, having been lost at sea for 30 years with all the crew lost. And actually, the poster behind you is making me think of the 30 years thing. I've suddenly realized
Yeah.
where I got 30 years from. Um, but it didn't go anywhere. I didn't have the next scene even for that film. And so Mary said, well, what happens next? I was like, I don't know what happens next. And she said, well, what if not everybody in the community is surprised that the boat has come back? And that was the moment where it really opened up for me. And I thought, that's really interesting because it stops being a film about solving the mystery of where the boat's been. It starts being a film about the mystery of why not everybody's surprised that the boat has been away. And then it becomes less a film about time travel and more a film about human behavior within the context of time travel. And it was quite easy to write from then. We bashed the story out, and then I wrote a first draft. And to start with, it was going to be something I was going to write and hopefully going to sell, because I thought after COVID I'd go back to making Ennis Main. So I wrote it as a much bigger film. It was much more sprawling. It was a bigger fishing boat. There was more crew on the boat. There was more characters. There was more family. And the more I wrote it, the more I fell in love with the characters, and the more I realized I wanted to make it. And then I kind of really pared it back and took it back to the bones and removed a lot more of the time travel, because it's really complicated writing a time travel story because it has repercussions in all directions once you change something. It's not like a linear thing where you change something and then the next scene is affected. You change something in the beginning, change something in the middle, and suddenly the beginning of the film doesn't make sense, or the end of the film, or something parallel to the film suddenly jumps up. So I decided to remove a lot of the time travel but in some ways make it more of a time travel film by having this one moment of time travel, but to be able to sort of deal with the humanity of how people deal with that, and then the themes become much more complex.
Well, I'm glad you say the humanity of it because I know you mentioned Back to the Future, but this isn't that. This isn't a rollicking adventure. This is really the story of these two men trying to grapple with this tension between the past and the future, present, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, and I would love to ask you too about fishermen, about the mythology. There's a certain mythos around fishermen in a film like this, and what you wanted to bring out about that position in this community, and why that was of interest to you.
I mean, it's just endlessly interesting to me, especially in a community that in the contemporary time in the film is kind of dead. The community's gone. A lot of the villages
Mm.
derelict, the pub's empty, the post office is a food bank, and that interests me because it's not necessarily it's a kind of heightened version of the present within Cornwall. And one of the anomalies is the idea that you'd have a derelict harbour within Cornwall, because you wouldn't. It would either be industrial, it would either be used for being fishing, and as soon as nobody's fishing from that harbour, it would be rebranded into a sort of leisure facility, and there'll be paddle boarders and pleasure boats everywhere. So it's a slightly exaggerated future, but what I wanted to paint was what happens to a community where the common purpose of the community, the thing that founded the community, is no longer there.
Mm.
And with the time travel, it was interesting because you can show the contemporary first, which is kind of normal, even if it's a bit heightened. And rather than showing a decline, you kind of jump back into the past to show what was lost, and then that becomes even more staggering. That I always think that in the beginning of Rose in Nevada, you see the food bank, and food banks are normalized in the UK. They're the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world, yet we have a huge amount of people who are relying on charity to be able to eat, and that's kind of normalized. And food banks aren't bad. Food banks are great because they serve a process, they serve a purpose, and they help people. The fact they're normalized is unforgivable in a modern society that we have got to that point. Now, you can make a real statement about that by going from the past and showing how things were, and going into the future and showing how they declined. And you can say, God, look where we are now. But then you've kind of been didactic with it, and you're telling people that there's a message there and you've got an agenda. By jumping back in time, suddenly this thing that's very normal at the beginning of the film suddenly becomes a post office, which is like a beacon of a functioning society. Where in the UK, you could walk into the post office and send a letter to your next door neighbour or somewhere 1,000 miles away, and it cost exactly the same price. What a beacon of how a functioning society can be. By jumping back in time, that kind of becomes a background that people can pick up on and go, Jesus, I remember that. I remember when we had post offices. I remember when we had public toilets. We're supposed to be progressing, but we're kind of going backwards. So that was interesting to me, how those communities change once the common purpose is gone. And things like crime go up, addiction goes up, all of these kind of things. And with the fishing, that's really, that is really evident in fishing communities. It can be it's a boom, and it's a feast or famine in existence. Sometimes there's fish and there's money. Sometimes there's nothing, and there's poverty. But the fishermen endure. They're still there. They're still going. And I remember at the wrap party, the skipper, owner of the boat that we used, came up to me and said, I think he thought when we first started shooting, he thought, oh, bloody film people, here they come down with, trailers and all this kind of stuff. But he spent so much time with us. He said at the party, he said, God, you lot worked hard making this film. And he said, it's not as hard as fishing, but making a film is hard. And he was like, that was the greatest moment, to hear that. And I thought about it afterwards. I thought, well, making a film is a bit like fishing. We're not risking our lives, so I'm not putting it on that level. But in the same way, when you make a film, you go out and you don't know what you're going to come back with. And even if you come back with something, you don't know whether the market is going to pay you a good price for what you've come back with. So there's this risk of going into the unknown. So I kind of started thinking, God, there's real similarities between fishing and film. And also I started thinking there's other similarities. Like the fishing industry is always on its last legs. It's always going to die. It's always going to die out. It never does, because it tweaks what it's doing. It moves. In Cornwall at the moment, there's a massive problem that we've got loads of octopi around, and they're going in the crab pots and eating all the crabs. So the crab fishermen haven't got any crabs. But then now they found a market to sell octopi. So they move. They sign it. They go with the blows, and I think that's the film industry. Film industry, every day there's another reason why film is dead, but it isn't. 130 years in, I was at a screening last night, a full theatre here in Hollywood. Everybody sat in rows in the dark room looking at a screen, exactly the same way we started in the 1890s. It tweaks, but it doesn't change. And I think I was able to find these similarities between filmmaking and fishing. And also the other thing is that there's real stereotypes around the fisherman. There's an archetype, and they're all nonsense. because all fishermen are individual. They are the last of the hunters. They're the last of the great individuals. So this cliche of a fisherman is total nonsense. So I wanted to lean into that. So you do have these, you have these greenhorns who go onto the boat who are purely there. They're modern kids, and they go onto the boat to make money, pure and simple. But then you have the salty sea dog there who represents all the fishing, or all the fishing through time. So I like the archetypes, but I like to subvert that as well, because most fishermen I know are kids who are into playing video games and whatever, and fast cars and stuff like that. But they go fishing because that's the community they're in, and maybe they haven't, school wasn't for them, and they left without qualifications and stuff. So they get a job on a fishing boat, and they get money to sustain their lifestyle or to sustain their family and stuff like that. So there is none of the cliches. All of the cliches ring true, but all of the cliches are nonsense as well. So I was really keen to put that on screen.
I love that because yes, you're right. Like that's you don't just lean into those stereotypes that we think we know
Mm.
in this world. Like you're just it's across the gambit. And I not considered the film industry and fishing in the same way, but that's actually a fantastic metaphor for you going out there and taking the risk with a film like this, and them going out and taking different risks
Yeah.
every time they go out. It's just incredible.
Yeah, I think with the fishermen, they go out to catch a specific fish, but then if a boat that's catching the same fish comes in with a hold full of fish and they go to the market, suddenly nobody wants that fish anymore. It's the same here. You sound if you listen too much to what the market in terms of film is doing, saying, "Oh, look, you've got to make a a straight genre film because that's what everybody's watching at the moment." Go right, great. Well, I'll start writing it. A year later, you got a script. A year after that, you got the finance. You go out and make it. You're a year in post production. You come back 3 or 4 years later. Nobody wants that anymore because the market's been flooded. So there's sort of these. There are these similarities. But I didn't realize it was only through speaking to Lee at the rap party that it was his wisdom. The wisdom always comes from the fishermen, in my experience. So if you want to know what's going on with the sea, if you want to know what's going on with the climate, if you want to know what's going on in the world, ask a fisherman. If you
True.
want to know what's going on with filmmaking, ask a fisherman. I remember when I first made my first film, Bait. I remember speaking to a fisherman back home, and I walked past the pub, and he was stood outside the pub, and he called me over. He said, "Oi." He said, "Come here, I've seen your film." And I thought, "Oh God, what's he?" Because it was about fishing as well. And he said to me, he said, "Yeah, I liked it." He said, "I think it's going to do well. It's going to do well in art house and avant-garde film festivals." This is a Newlyn fisherman saying this to me. Next week, picked up a big award at an art house film festival in Poland that I was at. And it was like, that's the wisdom of the fisherman.
I love it, honestly. Um, I love it, honestly. It's like you said, this is a film that really taps into that human search, but never leans fully into the tropes either. And I absolutely think it's so much fun.
Thank you.
Um, Mark, I see that we're out of time, but I really appreciate the chance to chat with you about it. Thank you so much for your
Yeah,
time.
sorry about the time limitations and sorry for the delay, man. Thanks for hanging around for the chat.
No, no, absolutely. This has been a joy, and the film is a joy as well. Thank you so much as for your time. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thanks, dude. Nice one. Cheers.
Cheers.